a project by Marisa. Hope I'm saying the name correctly. It's a CLI project, again, a CLI tool that reviews your documentation to find wording that is not really helpful to, I was going to say beginners, but actually to anyone. It tries to find words like simple, easy, and stuff like that in your documentation. And it helps you find those words, remove them, or replace them by something a bit less, demeaning maybe, or I'm not sure what's the right way to say it. Anyway, really interesting project. Very well done, I think. I've been trying it out, so it's working quite well. Not a lot of stars, I think. Not many people, we can safely assume that not many people use it at the moment, but let's review and let's start with the documentation first and the project in itself on GitHub. I love the name, it's simple, I love simple stuff, and the name, yeah, obviously I love it. Good documentation all over. We have tags, that's great. We have a license, this is good. I think we have the license file. Yep, all good. Releases, perfect. We even have change logs in there, so that's really, really good. And then we have the README, which, again, very good. One thing I would change, however, here is show some examples. And I think that's what I mean, I knew the goal of the project. I write a lot of documentation, and I know that avoiding words like simple or easy or quickly is good. But I'm not sure everyone understands that. And I think writing some examples of bad phrasing and good phrasing here could help. So that could be something to improve in there. Maybe try to simplify that, or just less text, because that's the part where you want visitors, readers to understand very quickly what the project is about. And yeah, having short of sentences here could help. I like that. And I like the API of the project. You just run it, just works. Perfect. I noted that the build is red. I think it's just a line that doesn't fit the coding standard, so it's really simple to fix, but that's something to do. And that's about it for me regarding the README. So let's dive into the code. The code is really clean, using the Symfony console as a framework to write the CLI application. So the entry point is that file, and that file simply runs the Symfony command, Symfony console. And we have two commands, one init and one scan command. So init will create a configuration file like this one that the tool will use to run. And the second command is the scan command, which is where obviously the job is done. So it will scan the files and find some keywords in your documentation. Let's start with the scan command. I think that's the main part of the project. And so that's where I started reading the code. I think it's very clean. There's a lot of typing and a lot of documentation. So it's really, really clean code. I did notice some things that could be maybe improved. And most of that is regarding naming. So I know that when you write your own project, it's you find what you've written and you understand everything, so that may not be obvious. But as a newcomer to that code base, some parts were a bit confusing. Let me try to find some examples. Maybe this one. Gen reports, that's, I'm guessing this is a generate report, and if it were me, I would simply write the full word, because it's not really that long and it's much more clear. This one as well, output time. So I'm guessing this is, let me show you how it runs. This is this line here, how much time it took to run, and I would maybe use something clearer, elapsed time. And those are very, very simple changes, but there we go. We have a better understanding of what's going on. And I found this pattern in a few places. So let me show you where the actual scanning of files happen. So that's the line here. For each file that we need to scan, we will run the scan method, which is perfectly fine. For me, it could be scan file, but scan is clear enough. So I'm familiar with the Symfony Finder component. If you're not familiar with it, this is a Symfony component that helps you find files. Like you have filters and exclusions, and it can browse through directories to find the files that you want. But I think you don't have to use name finder here. It could be files to process, and I don't really care if it's the Symfony Finder in there. Prepare list of files. You could even go that far. List files to process, and then you have your list, and you can iterate that. Very simple changes, and maybe it improves it just a little bit, some parts. I'm not sure what this is, and this is an example where naming could be improved, maybe. And so we have most of the job, I think, is done by that file reader. So again, here the file reader, right? But what is a file reader? To me, a file reader is a class that may, open the file and then return every line as text. But here, no, we are getting some errors by reading the file. So to me, it's more like finding problems in files. Like we could even name that problem finder, or oops, I think I did a mistake here. Problem finder, or I'm sure we can think of a better name, but yeah, let's go with problem finder for now. A quick note about PHP Storm shortcuts. Here I used the refactor rename shortcut, and I changed all the shortcuts. So don't try to use the same shortcuts in your project. It will probably not work, but I use this one a lot. So that's in one click, I can rename classes like that. So we have a problem finder, and that problem finder can find errors. That method is no longer a read thing, I think. Oh, it returns this. Oh, okay. So that's a bit like doing like read and then give me the errors. Oh, that's interesting. So I think I'm not a huge fan of that, but maybe I'm wrong. So here's what I think. It seems to me that this class is responsible for parsing the file and finding the problems, but it seems that the problems, the errors, are stored inside the class. So it's both a service and like an entity, like a domain object that contains information, a data container and a service. And usually it's not really a good thing. Usually you want to have service classes that will perform an action, but they don't have any state inside of it. And separately from that, you have other classes that store states. And that lets us write stateless services. Hopefully that makes sense what I'm trying to say, but here we are reading and storing data inside of the class and then getting it. Maybe the errors could be returned by the read method. So instead of storing, how does it work? Okay, problems here. It could return that, and right. So if we wanted to change that, let's remove internal state from the class. So problems, let's remove that, and let's see what breaks. Okay, let's use local variables. We will have something like this. I guess scanline would return new problems that we would merge into our existing array. And let's change that. Okay, the problems would be an array. This one would be obsolete. And that would be an array of problems. So with a few changes, we made that method and that class stateless. I haven't tested, so maybe I did a mistake here, but the main idea is to, you can easily change that to be stateless. One alternative could be to use parameters like this, like let this method change the array. That way we can remove that and have the array here, okay? And we change that, so we no longer have to return the changed array because it's the same array, we are changing that. But if we do that, we have to pass the parameter by reference like this. And this is not really a good way to solve that problem. Even though there are less lines of code, that kind of implementation usually leads to some mistakes because you are not always aware here that you are passing a variable that will be changed by the method. And it's not really how it works. Usually in most cases in every code base, you don't expect your array to be changed. So I wouldn't recommend that solution. Instead, go with the immutable stuff like this, and that should be good. So that method is about, we can rename that, right? So let's do that without the shortcut, just so that you can see. Find problems. There we go. Okay, so those were a few suggestions. What can we... Scanline is clear enough. I'm not sure what this does. But anyway, let's put aside naming stuff for now. I did notice a few data object classes here. So I'm guessing this represents a problem that was found in the code base. And I see that you're using Psalm, which is really great. That way we can mark this class as immutable. And actually, even without the annotation, I think the class is immutable already. There are only getters and no setters. So I think you can either remove that or you can go further and keep that and use Psalm to keep the class immutable with static analysis. And we can make all of that public. And I did that in the previous video as well. I love adding some public properties and relying on Psalm to make sure that nobody can change those properties. Now I can actually... Oh, we are not in PHP 8. With PHP 8, we could move that into the constructor parameters. But let's keep it in PHP 7.4. And with that, we don't need those methods anymore. So I can find usages. This is a shortcut to find usage. You can, I'm doing command click, and you can go and change all those usages by actually removing the functions. What's the problem here? Yeah, okay. So that's a good way to remove some code. I know, however, that if we do that, it's no longer consistent between getting the file name, which is, file name, and getting the unformatted line. Here, this is a method. So it's not longer consistent, right? Here it's a method and it's a property. And I'm sure it will bother some people, and you prefer to have either everything with methods or everything with properties. And here we can't really move that into a property because it's calculated. So yeah, we could maybe add a property here, and we could do that. Not sure if it's worth it. It's a bit weird. But my take usually is that's fine if it's not all consistent. That's fine. And here we only have three methods, the constructor and properties. Then the class is a little bit simpler. We removed a lot of noise. I mean, a bit of noise. Okay, and finally, the last thing I noticed was, let's get back into the scan command, and I think that was in the report. So we scan the files and then we write here, get files, scan, and generate the report. And it seems you have different ways to write the report. So it can be JSON, JUnit, HTML, which is very, very fine. And I noticed that depending on the report name, you call a static method on a class, and the class is JSON report and JUnit report. And I thought that's a perfect place to use, interfaces and polymorphism. Like I have an abstract or interface report implemented by all those methods. So what I'm going to do is not really, in this specific case, with those 8 lines of code, it won't change the face of the world. But I'm just using that example to show what can be done with interfaces. I'm not saying here in this specific case it's better, but it's an alternative, and I just want to show that. So let's go into JSON report class, and we have this directory. So what we're going to do is we are going to extract an interface from those 3 classes. Let's take the JSON report and extract interface. We'll call that report in the same namespace, and we will extract the generate method. Let's add that. Okay. Just this, what I usually do is remove any kind of duplication between the code and the documentation. So we can remove that. That as well is the same thing, so we can remove that, and void is here as well, so we can remove that. It generates a report, it's not really JSON, and then we can, we will keep that. This is for Psalm, that's very great, and we will implement that. So it's done here. We can add that as well to the HTML report, and it's already implementing the generate method, so that's perfect, and JUnit. And just like that, we have an interface, and we can use that interface here regardless of the format. Let's say we have our report class, we will be able to call report generate. Now, how do we get the correct instance to use? And that's, I'm not sure if there's a best way, but I'm going to show a way I've been using in some projects recently. So how do I get the correct class from that name? One way would be to have to turn that interface into an abstract class. And can we do that? No. So let's change that into an abstract class. By the way, the difference between abstract classes and interfaces, that's something that's been up for a debate for a long time. My take on this is that there is no difference between an interface and an abstract class. Of course, an abstract class can have actual methods, not really abstract, but an interface is simply an abstract class without any implementation. So moving between interface and abstract class doesn't really change anything. Like, that's fine if you do that. I just have to change implements by extend, and there's virtually no difference. So you don't have to think it over too much. Like, should it be an interface? Should it be an abstract class? Is it bad to change an interface into an abstract class? Yeah, honestly, don't sweat it. Use whatever is working fine for your project. Here I need to have a public static function, so I will use an abstract class. Here's a nice shortcut in PHP Storm, public static function, and I hit tab, and then I have my function already from name. So here I will call that in the scan command. In the report format, I actually create from format name or from format name, and that will return a report instance. Why do we have any error? Oh, it's no longer a static method. It doesn't have to be a static method. Okay, good. So now we can take that and move it here. Now return new JSON report. You can remove the break because it's useless. It's after a return. And always, and we can see here we have an error, always deal with the default. Throw new exception, unknown report format. So this isn't perfect, polymorphism, because all our types are hard-coded here. But most of the time it's fine. And unless you're doing a kind of module, an extendable module system with plugins provided by third-party developers, you know all the instances you have to deal with, so it's fine to do that. Really, it works, and that's good enough. If you have an extensible module system, then you can do a map of, dynamic map, like an array of PHP classes. That's what I do, for example, I think in PHPDI, like JSON, and then you have the JSON class. And that way, with a module system, you can allow developers to add new entries to that map, and then you can do return new. That's one way. But it assumes that the constructor takes no parameter as well, right? Then you can use a dependency injection container. We're getting ahead of ourselves, so we don't need that. So there we go, and then in the scan command, we no longer, you can see that here, we no longer need to know about all the reports. Okay, that's about it. Those were the topics I wanted to show with that project. Thanks again, Marisa, for sharing your project. It's really interesting, and I hope you enjoyed that video. Thanks!